Hello and welcome to India and the World on DeKoder. I'm Nidhi Razdan. Our special guest on the program today is someone who served in the very highest positions in the government of India when it comes to foreign policy and national security. Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon was India's foreign secretary. He was also India's national security advisor under Dr. Manmohan Singh. In his career as an IFS officer, he has served as ambassador to China, as high commissioner to Pakistan, to Sri Lanka, and as ambassador to Israel. And so it's wonderful to be able to talk to him today at a time when India is facing some very difficult geopolitical choices, largely thanks to a war that has been imposed on everyone by Trump against Iran, whose ramifications are continuing to be felt. Ambassador Menon, thank you very much for being with us today. It's been difficult to pin you down, but we finally got you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, there were a number of things that I wanted to talk to you about. And the first was the recent signing of a pact between Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. What some are calling an Islamic NATO because of a particular clause that it has that if one of them is attacked, it would be considered an armed attack on all three countries. Even though we don't really have the full details of what this would mean, on the face of it, does this pact concern you? Should it concern India?
It should concern us, of course, because it is a change and quite a significant change in our strategic environment. It is, in a sense, a continuation of what Pakistan has done for a very long time: charge strategic rent, make herself useful to other big powers. And she has done this consistently, whether it was making herself useful to the US in the Cold War against the Soviet Union and China, whether it was working with China and the US in the war in Afghanistan when the Soviets were there, whether it's also working with the US and against the US at the same time in Afghanistan when the US invaded Afghanistan. And she's consistently also made herself useful to regimes in West Asia, to powerful regimes, partly by providing bodyguard services by offering her army, which is her USP. And this is not a new tradition. I mean, Ziaul Haq was responsible for Black September on the Palestinians, for instance, in Jordan. And they've had a long-standing security relationship with Saudi Arabia. I think the reason it should concern us now is because it is a very different kind of situation in which Pakistan is now making herself useful to both Saudi Arabia and Turkey. I don't anticipate an immediate military threat to us, or in any sense that it somehow frees Pakistan to do more than she's already doing vis-a-vis us. That she's always done, and she has done regardless, because that she regards as, at least Pakistan Army regards, as essential also for their hold at home. But I do think that it does give Pakistan a certain international credibility and utility, not just to Saudi Arabia and Turkey, but also to the US, which finds Pakistan now a useful partner as the Middle East rearranges itself. The failed war on Iran, which doesn't seem to be a success for either side, frankly, not for the US and Israel who started it,
This
or
way,
for
that
Iran.
if India
So,
were to if India were to target terror training camps in Pakistan, like another version of Operation Sindoor, whenever, does this pact essentially mean that then the Saudis and the Turks will be drawn into defending Pakistan at that time, or do we just not know that yet?
you know, A, we don't know, but B, NATO was never invoked Article 5. This business about an attack on one is treated as an attack on everyone else, never in history. And we're not really sure what this involves, this commitment. It's a very vague commitment. It may be regarded as an attack, but that doesn't mean that you have to therefore respond. It doesn't say we will necessarily respond to any attack on any one of us. That's not what it says. So, frankly, we don't know. We can pass it, and I'm sure the Pakistanis will try and present it as a defensive alliance and therefore try and prevent any offensive action against them. But we can't say today. I don't think it actually changes the military balance in that immediate sense, because both at the highest levels in terms of the nuclear equation or at the lowest levels where Pakistan has conducted asymmetric warfare against India, cross-border terrorism, various kinds of attacks for a long time, I think there it stays much the same. In the middle, of course, it does give Pakistan access to NATO technologies through Turkey. It will, in a sense, maybe embolden Pakistani decision makers in the Pakistan army, especially. So yes, I think it's significant, but I wouldn't be alarmed by it right away. And I think there are ways of dealing with this.
I think that explains why Delhi has reacted very cautiously to this as well. And you mentioned embolden, perhaps a Pakistani army and establishment that may be emboldened, which was my next point, because Donald Trump just yesterday put out a social media post welcoming this pact in capital letters, which, as you know, means that he's sort of very effusive about it. But it's significant that he chose to do that. Again, one does worry about the security implications in terms of the fact that Asim Munir has been feted by Trump personally in the last year or so. Then this happens. So tomorrow, if there is another misadventure by the Pakistani establishment, will they feel more emboldened to do something, another big attack?
But this is mind reading, and this is psychology, and I'm not a psychologist. But yes, from the US point of view, I can see why President Trump would welcome it, because by attacking Iran and not succeeding in any of the war aims that he set out for himself, the US Israeli attempt to build a new Middle East, which was founded on the Abraham Accords, which would have meant that the Sunni monarchies would have recognized Israel, that Israel and they would then have established diplomatic relations, and that there would have been a Middle East which was essentially part of the American security system. I think the Iranians have put paid to that by showing that the US cannot defend the GCC members, for instance, against attacks. And this is why Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the others are looking for alternatives, why they've entered into a pact like this. So the US would welcome something which ties them all back into a US security system, despite the setbacks which they've had in the last, since February 28th, since they attacked Iran. So I'm not sure that that part of it is worrying. How far will that embolden the Pakistani leadership? That's a matter of how sensible or how disconnected from reality they are. I don't know
The
enough.
relationship with Saudi Arabia, India's invested a lot in that particular relationship in the last 10, 15 years. The fact that the Saudis, they had their own sort of agreement bilaterally with Pakistan before this, but that they've entered into this sort of uh, pact that includes Turkey, which is also hostile to India's position on Jammu and Kashmir, amongst other things. What other ramifications you feel it would have on India-Saudi relations?
Well, India-Saudi relations have always functioned relatively independently of their other relationships. You would remember, I mean, we've been working closely with the Saudis on counterterrorism for something like almost 20 years now. And we've been doing that even when there were elements in Saudi Arabia which were linked to various radical Islamic proselytizing movements and so on, when there were links going back into the GCC. Because frankly, uh, it, it wasn't until very recently when I think the complete understanding came to many of the Sunni monarchies that these groups were as much a threat to them as they were to others, and that this was not a tiger that they could ride comfortably. And that I think happened very recently. So we have done those things which are in our interest with Saudi Arabia right through, whether it's the economic relationship, whether it's buying oil, whether it's our 2 million people who live and work in Saudi Arabia, whether it's counterterrorism work, whether it's other work, including we've in fact politically, economically, in every which way, I think we've maintained that relationship. I don't see this as changing that relationship. And we should not allow it to either, because if you do, you are in effect handing over your relationship with the Saudis to the Pakistanis to control.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's something you should never do. You should never lose the initiative in your ability. What strategic autonomy if you don't have the ability to exercise that autonomy?
I'm going to circle back to the West Asia conflict in a bit, but just looking at the neighborhood for a moment, we've seen for a while now that India's relationships in the neighborhood have been strained. Of course, we don't have a real relationship with Pakistan at the moment, but Dhaka has been a point of concern, and we have just heard that the new Bangladeshi Prime Minister, his visit to India is not working out because they are upset that the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who is in exile here, they want her extradition from here. The fact that she addressed a press conference here has not gone down well. How do you think we're handling and the sort of difficult choices India is having to make? On one hand, Sheikh Hasina has been an old friend and ally, but you also need to maintain a relationship with the new government in Dhaka.
Well, extradition is a pretty complicated legal process because they have to not only prove to the satisfaction of an Indian court that what they are alleging she did is a crime in India, but they also have to prove that there is sufficient grounds to believe that there was a crime in, or whatever crime they're seeking extradition for, in Bangladesh. So both criteria have to be met. This is not an easy process. And to convert it into a political issue, frankly, doesn't make sense because there are legal safeguards built into this process which prevent it becoming just being used as a political instrument. So I'm not sure that either it's in either Bangladesh's interest or our interest to peg the relationship to the extradition issue and to what Sheikh Hasina chooses to say or do and so on. I think it's in both sides' interest to actually rebuild the relationship. And I think both sides have the responsibility to do what's necessary for that. In today's situation, I think it's in their interest, certainly, it's in our interest as well. And this is why we're talking, at least we're discussing the fact of, Tariq Rahman's visit to India, the Bangladeshi Prime Minister, and why I think we need to restore that relationship. If you look at the public opinion surveys in Bangladesh, in the last 2 years, there's been a precipitate decline in the favorability index for India. I mean, we've lost something like 15% of those who used to think favorably about India. Those used to be a majority in Bangladesh as late as 2024. And I think there is ground to be recovered there. But on both sides, I think on the Bangladeshi side as well, it makes sense for them to take steps to try and build the relationship back. And I hope both sides do that without pegging it, again, to issues like extradition and so on. Each side's politics are complicated enough without having to bring the other side into it.
But is there a larger lesson for India and the way that it's dealt with countries in the neighborhood? Have we
Well,
some?
it's not the best time for us in the neighborhood. I grant that.
So what's
And
gone
I think
wrong?
you were pretty understated in describing them as
So
stressed. Yes, with the exception of Sri Lanka
right.
and possibly Bhutan, I think if you look around the neighborhood, I think we have work to do. Partly it's because of the nature of internal politics in our neighbors, whether it's Nepal, whether it's Bangladesh, that the revolutions in these places didn't happen because of us. They happened because of what was happening in their countries. But we are caught up in the wash. Whether we like it or not, we are part of a neighborhood where frankly we have so many affinities of language, of every border has cross-border ethnicities, and that whether we like it or not, we and our relationship becomes part of everybody, of all our other neighbors' politics. So I think we'll just have to deal with this new situation. Uh, Now, it's easy to go around blaming them, blaming us, blaming everybody, whoever your favorite, opponent is. But rather than that, rather than crying over spilt milk, I think we should be looking at the situation as it is today and see how we can improve our relationship with our neighbors, because we need a peaceful periphery in our interest, in our own interest. And frankly, we have big security interests in all these neighbors and in their being peaceful and calm.
Which brings me to a controversial question, but one that some have floated in recent months, which is Is it time to revive a regional grouping like SAARC? It's pretty much been dead in the water because India-Pakistan ties have collapsed. But do you think India needs to revisit that, or is that just going to be off the table given domestic
I
political
think SARC is useful. I think it could be useful. I think it depends on what you choose to use it for. I'm not sure why people turn their back on SARC. I mean, it didn't make sense to me. You know, SARC has functioned even when India-Pakistan ties were not good. And SARC has done useful work, whether it was, working out SAFTA, whether it was working out other arrangements on with the South Asian University, for instance. These are all things that SARC can do useful social, economic, other cultural, other work, bringing the subcontinent together and creating an atmosphere in which you can deal with the harder political issues outside SARC, because SARC doesn't deal with bilateral differences. So I don't think we should make SARC hostage to India-Pakistan relations and the day-to-day ebb and flow in that relationship. I've never understood actually why do we get rid of an instrument which could be useful.
The other difficult relationship for India in the recent past, of course, has been the one with the United States. So the neighborhood is one part of the story, but all the way across the seven seas, as it were, we still don't have a trade deal with Washington. Trump is not as erratic with India as he was maybe a few months ago, but clearly the fact that we don't have a trade deal is a sign that it's not comfortable sailing quite yet. What do you make of the way India has dealt with Washington and Trump's bullying in particular? Has it been smart to stay quiet largely on his bullying and his tactics? Or do you think India should have and should speak up?
I think, we've shown a great deal of patience, and I think we've shown a fair amount of maturity, actually, in the way we dealt with it. If we'd enter into an argument with Trump on social media, all in caps, how would we be any different? And I don't think that would have been the answer. We're not here to win arguments. And the purpose of foreign policy is to create outcomes which work for you. Now, we are dealing with an unpredictable leader and a country whose policy is also unpredictable now. You look at what Trump has done or his administration has done to the international trading system. It makes sense to keep negotiating the trade agreement because we still don't have clarity on where they're going to come down on tariffs. He's now brought in 301 thanks to what he says, forced labor, but he's also now examining under 324, he's examining excess capacity. Now, we don't know which, because they've made up their mind who they're going to, but they haven't revealed what they're doing. So let's see what they do. So it makes sense to hold off on the agreement. But for the rest of it, I think if you look at our performance, look at our export performance, since Trump upended it all and frankly applied the highest tariffs to us, higher even than China, us and Brazil, we actually diversified, went out to other markets, and haven't done badly at all, if you look at the last year. But that's the answer. The real answer to what the US is doing and to US unpredictability and frankly, to the US not implementing what were the accepted rules of the road established by the US is for us to find alternatives and to actually build our own strength and work with others who, like us, are suffering from this.
In a sense, the fact that I think what this Trump 2.0 has also shown is just how undependable America is as an ally and as a friend for a lot of its allies and friends, including the UK, including the Quad. What does it do to alliances or partnerships like the Quad, of which India is a part? Um, and does that again strengthen the case for India to do more in the region, to strengthen its relationships in the region at a time when America is so unpredictable and undependable?
But you describe America as undependable. I think all countries are undependable because international society is anarchic. Let's face it. Even though there is international law, there's no enforcement of the law. There's nowhere to go if somebody breaks the law and so on. The US is as dependable as anybody else. And can you trust them? you can trust them to follow what they think is their self-interest. And that's true of all the great powers. To the extent that they're powerful, they have more degrees of freedom in doing so. To the extent that they're weak, they have less ability actually to impose their will and to choose different options. So I'm not sure that this dependable business is a good basis on which to build policy. Does US recent or Trump 2.0 and recent US behavior, which is more than just Trump, by the way, it is a fundamental reworking of the American political system and of their view of the world. Trump did get a majority in the election, don't forget. And this is being expressed in a whole new, I would say, America's cultural revolution is going on actually right now. So, given that, yes, concentrate at home. First is self-strengthening, and you have to keep saying that. Do your neighborhood, manage your own periphery much better. Make sure you have a peaceful periphery. And work with those parts of the world economy and so on which are open to you, which you can work with. Look at Southeast Asia. I think, frankly, walking away from RCEP made no sense. That's the most dynamic economic region in the world. Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia. You need to find a modus vivendi with China. You need to do something there. You work with the others who are suffering. Look at Europe. Why did you get a free trade agreement with Europe after so many years of negotiating now? Thanks to Mr. Trump and his unpredictability and what he's done to the Europeans. So use this opportunity. Build the last 15, 17 years you've worked with all China's maritime neighbors, whether it's in a ring from Japan through Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, etc. Work with them on defense, on intelligence, on security. So I think what you need to do, I mean, my mantra is very simple. Issue-based coalitions of the willing and able. And these will vary. Depending on the issue, you'll find different sets of people to work with.
Right. Uh, that then brings me to the India-China relationship, which you also sort of alluded to just now. There's a possibility that President Xi will be in Delhi in a few weeks for the BRICS summit, and that would be, of course, a major event given the tensions of the last few years. There have been recent reports of some trouble in Arunachal Pradesh vis-a-vis the Chinese, which has been officially denied. But it's a familiar story in a sense, isn't it? Where you, on one hand, have an attempt to normalize the relationship, but you do have these skirmishes that are also happening on the side. Um, how do you think India is navigating this relationship? And what would you do differently if you were to deal with the Chinese today, as opposed to, let's say, 5 years ago?
Well, I think we're dealing with a very different China today. My summary is that Trump is making China great again. He's doing almost everything possible to help them in the world. But China, this is also a China which has major domestic preoccupations, whether with the economy and so on. So it seems to me that you need to actually recalibrate, reset the relationship with China at a much more fundamental level, not just manage the border and skirmishes here and there and making sure that you agree on patrolling limits and so on. I think you need a much more fundamental reset to the relationship. And I would hope that that's what the government is doing. Frankly, I don't know. I've been away from government now for 12 years.
When you say fundamental reset, in what way?
It seems to me that you need a strategic understanding on how you will take this relationship forward. How will you deal with the difficult issues, which include much more than just the boundary or the border. They also include China's presence in our neighborhood, China's effect on some of our basic interests. We need to get some idea of those. And we also need to look at where can we actually cooperate. Clearly, economic cooperation is still going on. But the terms of that cooperation need to be reset again, because the trade balance is so vastly in their favor. And if you look at the dependencies that have been created, frankly, I don't think any country can actually live with those for very long. So we need to rework that part. So I think there's a whole range, and there's a whole set of things you can do together, together in the outside world. And therefore, I think what you need is a proper strategic understanding between the two of you of how you will deal with them. And then within that framework operate. You're dealing with a 3,000-year-old bureaucracy. And in China. So ultimately, I think you have to remember that. This is not just one person's will, or, this is a long-standing habit of behavior and statecraft, which I think we can deal with. We've dealt with it in the past successfully, and I think we can do it. But the specifics, and frankly, I don't want to get into that because, I'm not privy to what's actually going on. I would hope that that's what they're doing.
Well, it is, as I said, quite a time of churn in geopolitics, and
Wherever you look.
everything's been upended wherever you look. Thank you very much, Ambassador Shiv Shankar Menon, for joining us today. It was a great pleasure to talk to you, to get a wide-ranging sort of lens on some of the biggest challenges confronting Indian foreign policy at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And we'll be back with another episode of India and the World next week. See you then.